Hey guys, welcome back. So this is part 2 on this Briggs and Stratton engine, which came on a free Powermate generator. The first part was mostly taking this thing apart, cleaning it up, and measuring it up. And by the end of that video, things were looking pretty good. Everything, for the most part, came within spec, and not only in spec, but they were close to the standard size. I mean, this engine has minimal wear on it, and even the original crosshatch pattern was still in the cylinder. The only question mark really was this journal here. I have two conflicting Briggs documents on what the clearance should be on that journal, and if I believe the lower of the two clearance numbers were well within spec, but if I believe the higher of the two, we are out of spec, but only just. So, I made the decision to rebuild this. I ordered the parts and they're here. We have the new connecting rod, new piston. We actually have two new oil seals. I already installed that one and pretty much ready to start putting this thing back together. So before doing that, now that the connecting rod is here, I actually want to measure the actual clearance between this journal and the connecting rod and see where we come in at. So to do that, I've got some plastic gauge here. This is the green one. It'll measure accurately between 1,000th and 3,000ths of an inch. So ideally, we'd come in at 1.5 thousandths. That is the standard size. And depending upon which spec you look at, either 2.5 thousandths is out of spec or 3.5 thousandths. But based on the measurements I took, I don't think we're any further out than 2.5 thousandths. But now that we have the parts, let's find out for sure. So what you do is you break off a piece of this plastic gauge, roughly the length of the journal, and you take the rod and the cap, you torque it down to the full torque spec, which is 100 inch-pounds, and then you remove the cap and inspect basically how much it got smushed. The more it gets flattened out, the tighter the clearance. So this would be 1,000th over here, 1.5 thousandths, 2 thousandths, and 3 thousandths. So ideally, the standard spec on this is 1.5 thousandths, so we'd be somewhere right there. And I'm going to install the connecting rod the way that it would be. So it is labeled PTO, and the other side says MAG for magneto. So the PTO side is this way, so I want to install it like that. So the way you do this is you find which mark matches. And in this case, this is 1,000th. It's not that. This is 1.5 thousandths. We're getting close. That would be the standard size. This is 2 thousandths, and you can see we've actually passed it. So we're actually somewhere between 1.5 thousandths and 2 thousandths. And that puts this actually within spec according to both the Briggs documents. So that is good. So I already replaced the oil seal on the case. I just have this one left. And just take note before you pull it out on the position of this oil seal. It is about, I don't know, maybe a 1/16 down. So you want to set it back just about the same as it is now. I think that's good. May have overshot a bit, but we still have the hole free right there, which is important for the oil to drain back in, so I think we'll be okay. I'm going to attach the new connecting rod to the new piston, and the pin that was on the blown one, I think is bent, so I'm not even going to try to reuse that. I do have a couple other pins that I've measured up. They're within spec, so I'm going to go with a used good pin. Okay, so the piston has an arrow on it, which points towards the flywheel. That corresponds with the mag writing right there on the connecting rod. Yeah, make sure that goes in the groove. So I've been taking a minute just measuring up the rings, and for the most part we're looking good. All the rings I've measured so far came in at about 10 thousandths of an inch. According to the service manual, between 8 and 16 thousandths is standard size, 30 thousandths is reject. But then I got to this last ring, and the gap's actually too small. It's less than 8 thousandths. I would say probably closer to 5. So we'll start with the 8 thousandths. And it does not fit. Let's go a little smaller, maybe. Yeah, we'll try 5. Yeah, 5 fits, so we're off, and it's on the small end, which is not the side you want to be off on, because these rings expand when the engine heats up, and if it runs out of gap, if that gap closes to 0, the ring's going to start pushing really hard on the cylinder. It's either going to cause damage to the cylinder or just break the ring. So that ring does need to be filed. Yeah, so now we're at 10, probably a little bit over. Check the middle of the ring travel. Yep, still at 10. And still at 10. So the rings are good. Just put them on the piston, get the piston installed, and then start throwing the bottom end together. The center ring has 2 stripes, and they must be to the right when installing it like that. The top ring does have a mark right there. Very hard to see. It's actually red, which doesn't show up too well. But that, similar to the bottom one, goes to the right. The service manual calls for 100 inch-pounds, which seems a bit light given the size of this bolt. The check chart calls for 200, which I tend to believe, so I'm going to bring it up, most likely to 200. So one check I like to do before completely getting this thing together is to get it at top dead center, not on the compression stroke though. Top dead center in between the exhaust stroke and the intake. And at that point, the piston is at the top. And if you rock the crank, you should see the valves switching between exhaust and intake. And if your timing's on, that's what you should see. But if these valves are switching and the piston's anywhere but at the top, then you did something wrong with the timing. Yeah, the exhaust is tight. The intake has a little bit of clearance, but 5 thousandths does not fit, and it should be between 4 and 6 thousandths for both. Okay, that's a little bit funny. Trying to figure out how this box goes on. It's a little different than most that I work on, and that's because it was upside down. And the breather line was missing. Actually, I shouldn't say it was missing. There was a fuel line loosely jammed in there. It didn't fit at all. So I got the correct breather to put in here. But when putting it in the way that this was installed when I got the machine, the breather line was way here and it wouldn't fit. So finally realized whoever put this together at one point put the box upside down. Okay, ready to give this thing a try. Got the temporary fuel tank hooked up. I also backed off the spring tension on the governor, so it's going to run slow, assuming it starts. Now, I didn't clean the carb. I did take a quick peek in the bowl. It looked pretty good, so I think it'll start, but potentially there might be issues there. And I've got a tachometer hooked up so we can see how fast it's running once we get it going. Yeah, not too bad. The engine sounds good. The carb definitely has issues. It needs to be cleaned. So we'll get that cleaned up, get this engine back on the generator, and see if the generator itself works. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to clean that carb for a few reasons. First, the carb's already clean. You know, I already took a peek in here. I saw no issues. I don't see any issues now. I mean, it's not to say that there couldn't be somewhere, but I think the ultimate issue here is that this is a clone. It should say Nikki right there, and it doesn't. You know, if I take an actual Nikki carb and look at it in the same spot, you see right there it says Nikki. So I know a lot of people don't like Nikki's, but this is 1,000 times better than a clone. I have another one here, which I pulled off a storm responder that was running very poorly. And you can see it's the same clone. Now, this one was actually running rich to the point where it was flooding and backfiring. So I didn't even clean this one, didn't even try. I just set it aside, put a Nikki on, it ran fine. So I think that's what I'm going to do in this case. It's a clone. It's not going to run right. It's not to say I couldn't try drilling something out, but it's not even worth it. I got 4 OEM ones here, and I know this one's a little bit questionable, so we'll give this one a try and see how it does. Yeah, big difference with the OEM carb. On the generator side of things, I don't have any official torque values. That said, I'm going to tighten the bell housing to 20 foot-pounds, and the rotor bolts will be 23. The stator bolts will be 90 inch-pounds. With the spark plug still out, I'm going to pull the engine over a few times. Just make sure I don't hear that rotor making contact with the stator and that the engine isn't binding. Perfect. All right, it's looking pretty good. And it's just about done. I mean, the only thing left is the tank, but I'm going to hold off on that for now. I just want to get it back outside. We'll get it started, adjust that spring tension to get the speed up to 61.5 hertz, and then we'll test out that power head and make sure everything's good down there. Power, 110 volts, 52.8 hertz. .4, 130 volts. Well, we started off pretty good. It started first pull, and it was making power. So bumped the speed up to about 61.5 hertz and applied 1,000 watts. And the engine started bouncing around quite a bit. So I think I might need to move that governor spring. I actually set it in the 5th position, and that's usually where they are, like around 4 or 5. But this one was on 6, which I thought may have been a mistake. Now, the further away you go from this shaft, the more, or I should say the less sensitive it is to a load, meaning the engine speed might sag a bit more than you would like to see on a generator. But if you go too close, you'll start to get surging because the governor becomes too sensitive and it just starts oscillating, which is kind of what I was seeing there. I mean, it's not to say it couldn't be the carb, but let me put the spring back where it was. We'll readjust the speed and try applying a load again. All right, let's try that out. We're at 57.5. I'm just going to try a light load to see how we make out. Okay, we're at 61 hertz, 127.6 volts. think I was wrong about the governor spring. I mean, putting it back in its original position didn't solve the hunting and surging. It may have minimized it a bit, but the fact is it's running lean. I did have to click this about 2 clicks over toward choke to get things to smooth out. I set the engine speed to 61 hertz unloaded, and at 3,000 watts, it held pretty well. It was at 60.2 hertz, I think 119 volts. So overall, the engine, the power head's doing very good. The carb, well, needs to be cleaned. It's running lean, but that's okay. It's a lot better than the clone, and that was just in a parts bin. I have no idea where it came from or if it's ever been cleaned. So we'll get this back inside, get the carb cleaned up, and hopefully finish this thing up. So size 65 is the last one that this jet fits through. 64, it doesn't go all the way. So I'm going to drill it out to a 64. If that doesn't work, we'll try a 63 or a 62. Okay, that was a little bit too easy, so I have a feeling I might have to go bigger, but we'll start there. Can always take more off, but can't put it back. Perfect. Kind of surprised. I thought I was going to have to drill the jet out a bit more than I did, but it's running well. I mean, that carb's doing a good job. It seems to be jetted fine now and handles the 3,000 watt load quite well. No hunting, no surging, minimal speed drop on this engine. So we're looking pretty good. I'm going to get this back inside and we'll just finish it up. Overall, not too bad. My expectations were low going into this. I didn't know if I could rebuild it, but after taking it apart, I could see things measured up pretty well, close to the standard spec, and even the original crosshatch pattern was still in that cylinder. So all in, I'd say I spent about $150 in parts, and I'm glad I did. It was worth every penny of it. This engine sounds really good. The generator head's making power. And yeah, it's a good machine. So I wish I knew what led to this failure originally. I don't think it ran out of oil, or if it did, something happened suddenly. Like maybe someone ran this on a hill, the oil went away from the dipper, and just made quick work of that connecting rod. But I'm not sure. Let me know what you think in the comments. Anyway, I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.